Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our discussion about some of the wrong foundations for our relationship with God. If you recall, last time we spoke about Elijah, this remarkable man, truly one of the greatest men in the entire history of the Bible, who for all that he did, for all his responsibility, and for all of his knowledge, still had some things God had to sort out in his life, and he did in a very powerful way, so that Elijah can come to see that responsibility and knowledge were not the foundation of his relationship with God, and he had not failed a powerful, demanding God, but rather that God wished to lead him in his interaction with Elijah and with this incredible Elisha and this incredible incidents on Mount Horeb, to come to know the gentle God on the mountain, the Jesus who invites us to his meekness and humility. So we saw that although responsibility and knowledge are good, they are outgrowths of our relationship with God. They are not the foundation. If we make them the foundation, collectively as a church, we become the church of right knowledge, or the church of right deeds. But there are other pitfalls we can fall into. We can also build our relationship with God on our own human goodness, not recognizing that it is not what God is looking for. And we become the church of nice people. Frankly, I sometimes find good people the most difficult to deal with. That, I don't know, it's sad to say, and I don't wish to offend any, and certainly I fall into this all of the time. But I see in Christian circles particularly where it's not even a conscious thought, but unconsciously people think, well, I'm a Christian, I'm a good person, so therefore the things that I do must be good, right? And so because we just blindly assume what we're doing is right, I have seen Christian people do some pretty awful things, frequently to other Christians, because we don't stop to think that what we're doing is really wrong. It's really not stealing, I'll get to you later. Or it's really not lying, it's just don't want to hurt you. Or whatever it might be. We become blind to our shortcomings when we make the assumption that we're good people. And when we build our relationship with God on this false goodness, on this presupposed goodness, or sometimes, I shouldn't be too harsh, because many times it really is a goodness. It is a very great goodness. People serve in the community and they serve people around them. But if it is still built upon ourselves, it is not the relationship God seeks, which can only be found in a love the way He loves and His good, not our human good. And we can see this, for example, in the life of Cornelius. I won't spend a lot of time here because at the very beginning of the Christian journey, as we evaluated the Christian business plan and where the shortcomings are with the plan of why our current business practice is suboptimal, we spoke about Cornelius. And Cornelius was a good man, a very good man. But we can say, just as we said Elijah was the responsible, knowledgeable man, Cornelius was the good man who was not good enough. So we see in Acts 11, I'm sorry, not Acts 11, I want to go to Acts 10. In Acts 10, we see the good Cornelius. And he is sincerely a good man. Not even a self-deceivedly good man who just assumes what he's doing is good. He is really doing good things. A truly good man whom God commends as a good man. In Acts 10 and in verse 3, we see, one day at about 3 in the afternoon, he, Cornelius, had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. So Cornelius is a very good man, a commendably good man. But Cornelius, as we will see, is still not saved. He is not yet saved from his unsustainable good, which was still rooted in self, or perhaps had glimpses of original justice, the way true good, but it was not all the time, never missing the mark, empowered by God himself to make him as God is. Instead, he needs to be saved from this unsustainable lifestyle. And so what happens is the angel tells him to send to the city of Joppa for Peter, the chief of the apostles, who is staying there. And at the same time, Peter is having a vision. And Peter goes up to the top of the roof. It's around the lunchtime hour. And he sees the sheet coming down from heaven. And in the sheet are all kinds of unclean animals. Now, again, in Judaism at the time, there were laws about what you could eat and what you could not eat, as there are today. Certain animals were considered unclean, like pigs or eels or snakes. And others were considered correct for food. They were clean, cows and chickens, etc., sheep. And so a Jew would never eat food that is unclean. They would rather starve to death than eat something that is unclean. And so the sheet descends from heaven with all these unclean animals, and the voice says, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And he says, "I've never eaten anything unclean." And this actually happens 3 times. He's in a trance when this is happening. And the sheet goes up to heaven. And then as he wakes up, these men from Cornelius come and say, "Our master has sent us to bring you back to him." And Peter realizes that this dream wasn't about food. The dream was about people. Because just as the Jews would have regarded those unclean animals as unclean, so were the Gentiles. This huge division between Jews and Gentiles. And a Jew would never go into a Gentile household. The Gentiles were unclean. Cornelius is a Gentile. In fact, the very first person to come to Christianity without first converting to Judaism. So it is through Cornelius that God changes the whole game plan, so to speak, and allows us to see that he has something much bigger in mind than just saving the one chosen people. So in any event, Peter agrees to go with Cornelius. And they actually don't start off too well. You can always picture the meeting. Peter comes over to Cornelius. He brings some people with him. And he's really hesitant to do this, still having this very deep-bred cultural distrust and distance from the Gentiles. So he comes to meet Cornelius. And what does Cornelius do? He runs up to Peter and he falls down before him. And you could just picture Peter thinking, "Ugh, Gentiles, this is exactly what we don't want them doing." And he says, "Get up, I'm just a man." But in any event, he agrees to go into Cornelius' house and to tell him about Jesus Christ and what has happened in Jerusalem. And so, in the midst of Peter telling them this story, as we've already recounted, God powerfully acts all by himself to finally make the point that the church is universal. The church is for everyone. You don't have to be born into the church or born into the nation. The church is open to everyone. It is a universal church. And so while they're speaking, the Holy Spirit, just like on the day of Pentecost, comes pouring down upon the Gentiles gathered there, and they start speaking in tongues. And Peter says, now I get it. If God hasn't withheld salvation, if he hasn't withheld the Holy Spirit, who are we to stand in the way? And he baptizes them, and the church now begins among the Gentiles. Now, when Peter goes back to the church, which is all Jewish, and says what has happened, they're calling him to task. Why did you go into the house of a Gentile? And notice how Peter explains what has happened.